At 81, Harold thought he'd seen and heard it all. A retired high school principal with an air of dignity and an understated wit, he often believed that he'd figured out the rhythm of growing older. But deep inside, he was quietly aware of the subtle, creeping changes that came with age. Those little indignities that no one really talked about. Sitting by the window in his small but cozy apartment, Harold pondered over a cup of tea the ugly things he'd noticed in himself and in his aging friends. Not all of them were physical, but they were all real. And sometimes you just had to laugh. The first thing was hair. Not just the thinning on his head, which he'd long since made peace with, but the sprouting of coarse, wiry strands in places they hadn't belonged before. His ears, his nose, even his eyebrows seemed to have taken on a life of their own. He remembered his old barber once joking that nose hair was the body's final rebellion. Now, Harold wielded tiny scissors and an electric trimmer like a man preparing for battle. Then there was the dry, flaky skin. No matter how much lotion he slathered on, his arms and legs had taken on a texture reminiscent of desert sand. The winter months were especially brutal, leaving his skin cracked and itchy. Sometimes he caught himself scratching absent-mindedly in public, embarrassed but unable to stop. His younger self would have cringed, but now he simply shrugged and kept a travel-sized tube of moisturizer in his pocket. The third thing was posture. Harold noticed his shoulders rounding, his head dipping forward. He tried to stand tall, to remember the way he used to stride down school corridors with confidence, but gravity was persistent. His back ached more often, and sometimes when he caught his reflection in a window, he barely recognized the stooped figure looking back at him. Harold chuckled softly to himself, thinking of his friend Martha, who often complained about drooling. It was one of those things no one warned you about, how as you aged, saliva seemed to have a mind of its own. Whether from missing teeth, poorly fitting dentures, or just a relaxed jaw, it happened. Harold noticed it himself on occasion, especially when dozing off in his recliner. He kept a handkerchief nearby, just in case. Gas and bloating. Now that was a topic Harold's generation never discussed in polite company. But the truth was undeniable. His digestion had slowed, and foods that once brought him joy, onions, beans, even milk, now conspired against him. He'd learned to be strategic about his meals, especially before social events, and always carried antacids in his pocket. The sixth ugly thing was bruising. It seemed that his skin had turned paper thin overnight. A bump against the corner of the table left an ugly purple mark that lingered for weeks. Sometimes Harold couldn't even remember what he'd bumped into, but the evidence was there for all to see. His arms and legs became a canvas of unexplained bruises. Forgetfulness was next on his list. Harold prided himself on his sharp mind, but he couldn't deny that names escaped him more often these days. He might walk into a room and momentarily forget why he was there. The worst was when he called his granddaughter by his daughter's name. Everyone laughed it off, but Harold felt a pang of frustration. He'd taken to writing lists for everything, from groceries to errands to names of acquaintances. Then there was the matter of nails. His toenails, once neatly trimmed and healthy, had thickened and yellowed. Cutting them was a chore, requiring patience and a good pair of clippers. Some of his friends visited podiatrists regularly, something he'd once thought was unnecessary. Now, he understood. The ninth thing was constipation. No one liked to talk about it, but Harold knew it plagued many of his peers. His doctor had recommended more fiber and water, but there were still days when he felt bloated and uncomfortable. He joked with Martha that bowel movements had become a topic as common as the weather among their circle of friends. Hearing loss crept in as well. Harold found himself asking people to repeat things, especially in noisy environments. Sometimes he missed bits of conversation and nodded along, hoping he hadn't agreed to something ridiculous. He resisted getting hearing aids, but he knew the day was coming. The 11th ugly truth was incontinence. For Harold, it was a matter of urgency. He noticed he couldn't hold his bladder as long as he used to. Long car rides or lines at the grocery store became anxiety-inducing. He scoped out restrooms wherever he went and carried an extra pair of underwear in his bag, just in case. Lastly, there was the subtle but disheartening loss of smell and taste. Meals didn't seem as flavorful anymore. His once keen nose, capable of detecting the scent of blooming lilacs or freshly brewed coffee, had dulled. Food was still enjoyable, but it lacked the vibrancy it once held. He seasoned dishes more heavily now, hoping to coax out the flavors he remembered. Harold sat back and sighed. These ugly things, nose hairs, dry skin, stooped posture, drooling, gas, bruises, forgetfulness, thick nails, constipation, hearing loss, incontinence, dulled senses, they were part of the package of aging. No one told you about them in your youth, when you were too busy with life to imagine slowing down. But now he saw them for what they were, reminders of a life well lived, a body that had carried him through decades of laughter, love, and loss. He didn't resent these changes. Instead, he accepted them, adapted to them. They were, in their own way, badges of honor. He could still laugh with friends, hug his grandchildren, enjoy a good book, and watch the sun rise each morning. These little indignities didn't define him. They were just part of the journey. With whiskers purring on his lap, Harold sipped the last of his tea and glanced at his reflection in the window. His posture wasn't perfect. His hair was wild, and his skin bore the marks of time. But his eyes were bright, his mind still curious, and that, he thought, was more than enough.